On this day, Mark Perez, the special agent in charge of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, announced significant findings in the disappearance of Mike Williams, a real estate appraiser from Tallahassee. Mike was initially believed to have drowned while duck hunting at Lake Seminole on December 16, 2000, with suspicions that he was eaten by alligators. Standing here today, I can share the truth about Mike Williams' fate. Perez revealed, Mike Williams did not drown in that lake. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't abandon his wife and young daughter. He was brutally murdered. While specific details of the investigation remain confidential, Perez was pleased to inform that recent breakthroughs had been communicated to the Williams family earlier that morning. This story encompasses not just a narrative of love, betrayal, infidelity, and greed, but it also highlights the undying resilience of a mother. For over 17 years, Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, firmly contested the initial conclusion that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole. Her relentless determination prompted authorities to re-examine the case. She held on to her belief in her son's survival against all odds, stating, "I had two options, believing he was alive or dead. I chose to believe he was alive, and I truly think that sustained me." Despite facing criticism and being labeled as delusional, Cheryl maintained, "If I had given up, we would never have uncovered the truth." On the eve of the press conference, a shocking twist was revealed. Brian Winchester, a close friend of Mike and his wife Denise, who later married Denise, was involved in the case. In the church youth group, Mike's journey from a humble upbringing to becoming a successful real estate appraiser is a testament to his dedication and the sacrifices made by his family. His story is a poignant reminder of a bright future cut tragically short. Let's continue unrevealing this complex tale. Brian Winchester was sentenced to 20 years in 2017, not for Mike's murder, but for the kidnapping of Denise Williams, his then wife. Brian's fear that Denise would expose their dark secret post-divorce led him to commit the kidnapping. Denise, on the other hand, played a pivotal role in ensuring Brian received a harsh penalty. Her persuasive testimony and insistence on a severe sentence played directly into Brian's decision to cooperate with authorities. In a twist of fate, while Denise celebrated what seemed like a victory, Brian made a deal with prosecutors. At 49 years old, he confessed to planning Mike's murder and concealing it for 17 years. In return for his full confession and leading investigators to Mike's body, Brian received immunity from prosecution for the murder. This revelation led to Denise Williams' arrest on May 8, 2018. This case, filled with layers of betrayal and deceit, is indeed complex. Now, let's dive deeper into the intricacies of this tragic story, beginning with Mike Williams' early life and the foundational years that shaped him into the man he was. Commission arrived. They launched a search operation but found no trace of Mike, not even his hunting equipment or personal belongings. It seemed as if he had vanished into thin air. This absence of clues only deepened the mystery around his disappearance. During the initial investigation, authorities speculated that Mike might have fallen overboard and drowned. The possibility of alligators attacking was considered, but was not widely accepted as alligator attacks in such scenarios were rare. This theory led nowhere, and the case eventually grew cold. Denise was left to raise their daughter alone, supported by her parents and Brian. Mike's insurance policies paid out in full, providing financial stability but also raising eyebrows. It was Brian, after all, who had brokered these substantial policies. Years passed, and Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, never accepted the theory that her son had accidentally drowned. She tirelessly campaigned for the case to be reopened, convinced that foul play was involved. Her persistence paid off when new evidence emerged, leading to a re-investigation. The turning point came when Brian Winchester, facing legal troubles of his own from the kidnapping charges involving Denise, opted to cooperate with law enforcement. His confession revealed a plot between himself and Denise to murder Mike for the insurance money, a plan they had set into motion not long after ensuring Mike's life was heavily insured. Brian's testimony exposed the grim reality that Mike had been lured to Lake Seminole under the guise of a hunting trip where he met his untimely death. Denise's role in the conspiracy and subsequent trial painted a picture of a love and betrayal so profound that it led to murder As we dissect this case further, we uncover not only the personal dynamics between Mike, Denise, and Brian, but also a broader commentary on greed, trust, and the extreme lengths to which people will go to secure their desires. The case when it was reopened. Austin emphasized the lack of any signs of a violent struggle at the lake, but noted that the evidence, or lack thereof, pointed to something more sinister than a simple drowning or alligator attack. This new phase of the investigation focused on gathering more concrete evidence and re-examining the testimonies and actions of those close to Mike around the time of his disappearance. The relentless determination of Cheryl Williams played a crucial role in shifting the narrative. Her refusal to accept the initial conclusions and her continuous efforts to uncover the truth kept the case alive in the minds of the public and the authorities. Cheryl's tireless advocacy led to a deeper probe into the circumstances surrounding her son's disappearance, ultimately revealing the dark undercurrents beneath what was initially perceived as a tragic accident. The reopened investigation delved into the relationships and financial dealings within Mike's circle, particularly focusing on the life insurance policies and the beneficiaries. The involvement of Denise and Brian Winchester became a focal point. As the layers of deceit unraveled, law enforcement began to piece together a plot driven by greed and betrayal, which led to Mike's tragic end. Cheryl's quest for justice was fraught with personal sacrifices and challenges. Despite the threats from Denise and the strain on familial relationships, Cheryl's commitment to finding the truth never wavered. Her actions not only brought renewed attention to the case, but also set the stage for the eventual legal repercussions for those involved. As the case unfolded, it became a poignant example of how the perseverance and conviction of a single individual can challenge and eventually change the trajectory of a legal investigation. Cheryl Williams' dedication ensured that her son's story was not forgotten and ultimately led to the uncovering of a truth that might have otherwise remained hidden beneath the murky waters of Lake Seminole. As suspicions about Denise Williams and Brian Winchester deepened, the investigation shifted towards a potential conspiracy. The circumstances surrounding Mike Williams' disappearance, his usually not hunting alone, his truck's unusual location, the unexpected direction of the boat, and the motor being full yet off, all raised red flags that suggested something more calculated than an accident. Police officer David Arnett's observations added to the growing doubts about the official version of events. The inconsistencies in the boat's location relative to the storm's effects and the fact that it hadn't drifted despite being full of fuel contradicted the theory that Mike had simply fallen out while operating it. The detail that his truck was parked far from the usual concrete launch, requiring a difficult trek through mud, suggested that the scene might have been staged. The initial focus of the search efforts solely on rescue and recovery, without consideration for foul play, meant crucial time was lost in gathering forensic evidence. By the time law enforcement entertained the possibility of wrongdoing, the scene had been compromised by the activities of volunteers and the removal of potential evidence like Mike's car. Further complicating the investigation was the fact that after Mike's disappearance, Brian Winchester divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise Williams. This not only changed the dynamic among the group of friends, but also cast a shadow over Denise and Brian's relationship, particularly in light of the significant financial benefit Denise received from Mike's life insurance policies. The nearly $2 million payout was an extraordinary sum that investigators could not overlook. These developments led to a more targeted probe into Denise and Brian's actions and motivations. Their past interactions, financial transactions, and personal relationships were scrutinized for any evidence of premeditated involvement in Mike's disappearance. The investigation expanded to include interviews with family members, friends, and associates, seeking any information that could link the couple to a deliberate act of foul play. This renewed investigative effort was essential not only to determine the truth behind Mike Williams' tragic end, but also to ensure justice was pursued, considering the mounting evidence pointing towards a conspiracy rather than a mere accident. Cheryl Williams' relentless pursuit for justice involved a combination of public appeals and private pressure on the authorities. Her tenacity was aimed at shifting the investigation from the hands of an agency she believed was making no substantial progress in uncovering the truth behind her son's disappearance. The personal campaign she waged was both a testament to a mother's love and a strategic move to bring fresh eyes to a case that seemed stalled. Her decision to reach out to the Discovery Channel resulted in a televised feature, which significantly raised the profile of Mike Williams's case. This exposure not only rekindled public interest, but also increased the pressure on law enforcement agencies to take more decisive action. The story on national television highlighted the discrepancies and the peculiar aspects of the case, drawing attention to the suspicious circumstances surrounding Mike's death and the subsequent handling by the authorities. Cheryl's daily letters to Governor Rick Scott served as a constant reminder of the unresolved case and her dissatisfaction with the current investigative efforts. By appealing directly to the governor, she hoped to either reassign the investigation or appoint a special prosecutor, thereby injecting new momentum into solving her son's mysterious disappearance. This advocacy eventually bore fruit. The renewed attention and the mounting public pressure led to significant developments in the case. New investigators were brought in, and with a fresh perspective, they began to uncover evidence that previous efforts had missed or underestimated. The persistence of Cheryl Williams exemplifies how the determination of a single individual can play a crucial role in reopening cold cases and pushing the justice system towards re-examination. Her efforts not only kept her son's memory alive, but also ensured that the pursuit of truth and justice remained active, ultimately contributing to a breakthrough in the case. Burglary. This dramatic turn of events provided law enforcement with the leverage they needed to delve deeper into the intertwined lives of Brian and Denise, especially concerning Mike Williams's disappearance years earlier. Brian's arrest shed new light on his volatile and potentially violent nature, casting further suspicion on his involvement in Mike's case. The kidnapping incident revealed a level of premeditation and desperation on Brian's part, characteristics that were crucial for investigators to consider as they revisited the details of Mike's disappearance. During the legal proceedings for the kidnapping charge, Brian faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. This reality pressured him to negotiate with prosecutors. In a bid for a lighter sentence, Brian offered information about Mike's disappearance, which until then had been a tightly guarded secret between him and Denise. Brian's confession was a pivotal moment in the investigation. He disclosed the exact role he and Denise had played in planning and executing Mike's murder, details that only someone directly involved could know. This confession led to Denise's arrest and subsequent trial, where she faced charges for her involvement in Mike's murder. The unrevealing of these events was a direct consequence of Cheryl Williams' unyielding determination to uncover the truth about her son's fate. Her persistent efforts to keep the case in the public eye and pressure law enforcement to take action were finally paying off. The breakthrough in the case after years of seeming inactivity illustrated the impact of continuous advocacy and the importance of holding on to hope, even when faced with overwhelming odds. The charges against Denise and Brian marked a significant turning point, bringing some measure of closure to Cheryl and her family. However, it also highlighted the profound complexities of legal and interpersonal dynamics in cases involving close personal relationships and significant financial motives. From drowning. This incident brought Mike even closer to Brian, unaware of the betrayal that was unfolding between his wife and his best friend. The dynamic among the trio grew increasingly complicated, with Mike trusting Brian completely while Brian and Denise continued their clandestine relationship. As their affair deepened, Denise and Brian began to view Mike as an obstacle to their happiness. Furled by their illicit emotions and Denise's desire to maintain her image and custody of her daughter, the duo plotted a sinister plan to remove Mike from the picture permanently. Brian's revelation about this plot was a chilling admission of how far he and Denise were willing to go to secure their future, together without Mike. Brian disclosed that the plan to kill Mike was meticulously crafted. It involved staging a hunting accident where Mike would appear to have drowned in Lake Seminole, a location they frequently visited for duck hunting. This would explain any potential absence and allow Denise to claim Mike's life insurance, which Brian had sold to him, thereby securing a substantial financial gain. Denise's insistence on maintaining her public persona as a devout and dedicated wife and mother made her particularly adamant about ensuring the plan's success without any suspicion falling on her. The death would look like a tragic accident, leaving her free to live with Brian without the scandal of a divorce. When the day of the planned accident arrived, everything was set in motion. However, The plan did not unfold as smoothly as Denise and Brian had hoped, leading to unexpected complications and the eventual unrevealing of their scheme years later. Brian's confession, induced by his legal predicaments and the promise of a reduced sentence, finally brought the truth to light. His detailed account provided law enforcement with the missing pieces of the puzzle, enabling them to piece together the events leading to Mike's death and the subsequent cover-up. Cheryl Williams, who had never given up hope, felt a mix of vindication and profound sorrow as the horrific truth about her son's fate was confirmed. Her relentless pursuit of justice had finally resulted in a breakthrough, ensuring that those responsible for Mike's disappearance and death were held accountable. This case highlights the devastating impact of betrayal and deceit, not just on the victims, but also on their families and communities. Brian's recount of the events during his confession revealed the sheer desperation and chaos that ensued on the day of Mike's supposed accident. The plan, initially intended to appear as a simple and tragic boating mishap, unraveled rapidly into a dire situation that Brian was unprepared to handle. His panic, coupled with the unexpected resilience of Mike, who managed to struggle against the odds, culminated in a moment of sheer horror when Brian resorted to using his shotgun in a fatal, spur-of-the-moment decision. The details of the confession painted a grim picture of betrayal and premeditated murder, masked under the guise of a hunting trip among friends. Brian's intention to create a scenario of an accidental drowning was meticulously planned, from insisting Mike wear his wading boots to ensure he would sink quickly to the selection of the location known for its dangerous, stump-filled waters. However, Mike's fight for survival threw Brian into a panic, leading to the tragic outcome. Upon realizing the gravity of what he had done, Brian's primary concern shifted to covering his tracks and maintaining his alibi. He rushed back home, driven by the fear of being discovered, hoping to find his ex-wife Kathy still asleep and unaware of his early morning activities. His decision to pretend to have overslept was a desperate attempt to detach himself from the crime scene and establish an alibi that could distance him from any suspicions regarding Mike's disappearance. This chilling confession provided law enforcement with the evidence needed to move forward with charges against both Brian and Denise. The case, which had lingered in uncertainty and despair for years, finally began to see the promise of justice being served, largely due to Cheryl Williams's unwavering pursuit of the truth. Cheryl's long-held suspicions about the nature of her son's disappearance, her relentless advocacy, and the eventual unraveling of the truth highlighted the complex layers of deceit that had shielded the crime for years. The confession not only marked a turning point in the investigation, but also served as a testament to the lengths individuals might go to protect their interests, even at the cost of an innocent life. This harrowing tale of betrayal, conspiracy, and murder ultimately led to a profound impact on all involved, particularly the family of Mike Williams. As Brian Winchester and Denise Williams faced their respective punishments, the complexity of their actions and the devastating consequences unfolded in the legal system and in the court of public opinion. Cheryl Williams, whose unwavering determination brought critical attention to her son's case, saw the unfortunate side effect of estranging her granddaughter, Ansley. Despite Cheryl's efforts to uncover the truth and seek justice for her son, the family rift exemplifies the often painful aftermath of such traumatic events. Ansley's belief in her mother's innocence and her refusal to engage with the media or her family highlights the deep emotional scars left by the ordeal. The case also raises questions about the justice system's handling of such intricate and emotionally charged cases. Denise's appeal and the subsequent overturning of her murder conviction, yet upholding her sentence for conspiracy, underscores the challenges in proving direct involvement in crimes where circumstantial evidence plays a significant role. This story serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of deceit and greed, and the enduring pain inflicted on families caught in the wake of such tragedies. It also emphasizes the resilience of individuals like Cheryl Williams, who persist in their quest for truth against overwhelming odds, often at great personal cost. Jack's closing remarks encourage viewers to reflect on the complexities of human relationships and the profound effects that hidden truths can have on lives. It's a sober reminder of the realities that lurk behind the facade of normalcy, urging a deeper consideration of the moral and ethical dimensions of our actions and their impact on others. Psychologists often highlight three common reasons why teenagers commit offenses: the need for peer validation, substance abuse, and a sense of invincibility. In our focus today, we'll explore a tragic incident involving Mackenzie Sharilla, a schoolgirl whose actions led to a devastating loss of life. Despite her upbringing in Strongsville, Ohio, Mackenzie's behavior took a troubling turn as she grew older. She became increasingly selfish and reckless, dabbling in alcohol and drugs. Even in her adolescence, Mackenzie exhibited a sense of entitlement and a disregard for consequences. Her story takes a darker turn when she became the perpetrator of a terrible tragedy that claimed 2 lives. Shockingly, Mackenzie showed no remorse for her actions during the trial, even shifting her testimony multiple times. Born in August 2004, Mackenzie was the 3rd child in her family. Despite her parents' efforts to raise her with love and care, she grew up demanding and selfish. Mackenzie often got away with mischief and serious misdemeanors, fostering a sense of impunity. As the trial unfolded, Mackenzie's confidence in evading consequences was shattered by the judge's verdict, leaving both her and her mother dumbfounded. But who is Mackenzie Sharilla really? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into Mackenzie's background and the events that led to this tragic outcome. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more updates on this story and others like it. Let's unravel the mystery together. Mackenzie's childhood was marked by her amiable and open nature, noted by both classmates and teachers. However, as she grew older, her demeanor began to deteriorate significantly. She became prone to real tantrums, easily losing her temper and behaving impudently. Mackenzie's interactions were marked by a disregard for others' opinions, always insisting on having the final word and prioritizing her own interests above all else. During adolescence, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly challenging. While her parents attributed this to the transitional age, her actions were far from typical teenage rebellion. In high school, Mackenzie's troubles extended beyond her demeanor. She developed a concerning pattern of alcohol addiction and occasional experimentation with illegal drugs. Despite the reckless nature of her actions, she often escaped serious consequences. Mackenzie's social circle mirrored her behavior, indulging in vandalism, fights, and even theft. Despite brushes with the law, they were met with warnings and educational talks, reinforcing their belief in their own invulnerability. In contrast, Dominic Russo, a fellow Strongsville native born in September 2001, led a markedly different life. Raised in a large, loving family, Dominic excelled academically and remained actively engaged in sports. Despite the strict yet nurturing environment, Dominic enjoyed a wide circle of friends and maintained a balanced lifestyle. Dominic was accustomed to commanding attention and effortlessly became the life of any gathering. With his striking appearance and engaging personality, he naturally drew admirers from a young age. However, he remained focused on meaningful connections, steering clear of fleeting romances and prioritizing serious relationships. After graduating from high school, Dominic pursued his passion for music by enrolling in a local university, majoring in performing arts production. His dream was to carve out a career as a renowned music producer. Alongside his studies, Dominic showcased his versatility by writing and performing his own songs. By the age of 20, he had established his own small business, purchased a car, and secured a cozy apartment in a desirable neighborhood. He maintained his active lifestyle, continuing to excel in sports, while also earning recognition as one of the top students at the university. It was during this time that Dominic's path intersected with Mackenzie's for the first time, sparking a connection that would change both of their lives forever. Their initial encounter occurred at a party among mutual friends, an event that would prove fateful for them both. Dominic, a handsome and musically inclined young man with curly hair, immediately caught Mackenzie's attention. Unlike the guys she typically associated with, Dominic stood out for his education, manners, and ability to engage in thoughtful conversations. Meanwhile, Mackenzie, with her striking appearance, slim figure, and impeccable style, turned on her charm to captivate Dominic's interest. Their chemistry was undeniable, leading them to swiftly embark on a romantic journey together in the fall of 2021. As their relationship blossomed, they introduced each other to their respective families. While Mackenzie's parents embraced Dominic warmly, viewing them as an ideal match for their daughter, Dominic's parents harbored reservations about Mackenzie. The parents of the young man harbored mixed feelings about his relationship with Mackenzie. On one hand, Mackenzie presented herself as sweet, innocent, and eager to make a good impression. However, something about her raised immediate concerns for Frank and Christine Russo. Friends and family of Cheryl believed that Mackenzie had truly fallen in love for the first time in her life and hoped that the relationship would positively influence her character and behavior. Little did they anticipate the tragic turn that this youthful romance would take. As the couple began to appear together publicly, displaying affection and tenderness, word of their relationship quickly spread throughout the small town. While some who knew Mackenzie well felt sympathetic toward Dominic, most were simply happy for the couple. However, Dominic soon began to notice peculiarities in Mackenzie's behavior. Her defiant actions and insistence on having her way began to trouble him. Initially, Dominic attributed these behaviors to Mackenzie's youth and desire for attention. The couple made plans for their future, including marriage once Mackenzie turned 18, and dreamed of moving to New York City for Dominic's music career. However, Mackenzie's behavior grew increasingly alarming and even frightening. She demanded that Dominic comply with her wishes, throwing tantrums and acting like a petulant child when he disagreed. At first, Dominic attempted to brush off Mackenzie's behavior with humor, but as her actions became more aggressive, he realized the true nature of his partner. Mackenzie's public demeanor remained composed, but in private she unleashed her emotions on Dominic, sometimes resorting to physical violence. Eventually, Dominic decided he had endured enough and suggested they take a break to reassess their relationship. Mackenzie's response was explosive. She publicly confronted Dominic, issuing threats and hurling insults, displaying signs of obsessive behavior. Despite Dominic's firm stance on ending the relationship, Mackenzie persisted in her attempts to win him back, resorting to stalking and harassment tactics, including daily visits to his home where she unleashed a torrent of abuse and threats. She resorted to relentless tactics, calling him from various numbers, leaving messages on his voicemail, and bombarding him with emails and social media posts. At times, Mackenzie professed her love and pleaded for a fresh start, only to quickly switch to insults and threats. Russo found himself bewildered, unsure of how to respond to such behavior, as he had never encountered anything like it before. He attempted to reason with her, ignored her advances, and even recorded her outbursts on his phone a couple of times. Mackenzie's actions escalated to the point where she would publicly berate and insult Russo whenever they crossed paths on the street or in other public places, turning his life into a living nightmare. Despite his hope that she would eventually relent and leave him alone, he endured her relentless pursuit, clinging to the belief that she would eventually move on to someone else. One day, in front of witnesses, Mackenzie chillingly declared that it would be easier for her to kill Russo than to let him go. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, she would ensure that nobody else could have him. Although Russo initially brushed off these threats, those around him recognized the seriousness of Mackenzie's intentions. Among her most frequent threats were promises to physically harm Russo, including running him over with a car, driving off a cliff with him in the car, or stopping on railroad tracks in front of an oncoming train. Each scenario sounded terrifying, leaving Russo in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. Mackenzie's demeanor shifted as if she had meticulously orchestrated her actions, waiting for the opportune moment to stage an unexpected reconciliation. Realizing that her threats and insults were driving Dominic further away, she opted for a change in strategy. Mackenzie reverted to being sweet and charming, ceasing her attempts to pressure and harass her ex-boyfriend. Instead, she feigned remorse, expressing a desire to rectify her past mistakes and improve herself. She engaged Dominic in discussions about future plans, seeking his advice on university enrollment and emphasized her newfound focus on academics, particularly her upcoming exams. These apparent changes pleasantly surprised Dominic, who, despite everything, still harbored affection for Mackenzie. Moved by compassion, he agreed to assist her with university enrollment, leading to a resumption of their interaction. As they spent more time together, the couple grew closer, with Dominic believing that Mackenzie had genuinely transformed, becoming more mature and responsible. Unbeknownst to him, his feelings for her rekindled, overshadowing past grievances. However, this time, they chose to keep their reunion discreet, refraining from public announcements. Their meetings resembled clandestine rendezvous, where they relished each other's company, avoiding the scrutiny of others. When Dominic's brother Angelo caught wind of the situation, he warned that it spelled trouble. However, Dominic, blinded by love, brushed aside his concerns. Unbeknownst to Dominic, while he basked in the joy of reuniting with Mackenzie and the perceived changes in her, Mackenzie was crafting a chilling scheme against him. Enthralled by the notion of a dramatic car crash, Mackenzie meticulously mapped out her plan. Spending countless hours driving around the city, Mackenzie scouted for an ideal location to execute her plan. Unable to find suitable cliffs or railway tracks, she stumbled upon an isolated industrial area with a towering brick wall. Seeing the wall, Mackenzie's twisted imagination sparked a sinister idea. She envisioned a spectacular crash into the wall, intending for both of them to perish and their story to become legendary in the city. Despite confiding in her best friend about her plan, others dismissed it as mere fantasy, given Mackenzie's history of impractical notions. As July 2022 drew to a close, just a week before her milestone birthday, Mackenzie proposed to Dominic that they attend a party hosted by mutual friends. Viewing it as a chance to enjoy themselves and showcase their rekindled love, Dominic eagerly accepted her invitation, still trusting in Mackenzie's sincerity. On the night of Saturday, July 30th, Dominic and Mackenzie arrived at the party hand in hand, radiating happiness and affection. Their presence captured the attention of everyone around them, who admired the apparent harmony in their relationship. Throughout the evening, they reveled in each other's company, freely displaying their affection without inhibition. Unbeknownst to the attendees, Mackenzie clandestinely consumed illegal drugs to bolster her resolve for what lay ahead. As dawn approached, Dominic and Mackenzie bid farewell to their friends and made their way to the car. However, their plans took an unforeseen turn when Dave Flanagan, a friend of Dominic's, requested a ride home. Despite Mackenzie's reluctance, Dominic agreed, unwittingly sealing Dave's fate. With Mackenzie behind the wheel, Dominic in the passenger seat, and Dave seated behind them, the car set off into the night. Mackenzie drove cautiously, avoiding drawing any undue attention as they navigated the empty streets. Once more, Mackenzie contemplated her plan as her passengers drifted into slumber. Later, she claimed she intended to perish in the crash. However, her assertion was dubious, evidenced by her act of fastening her seatbelt during the last stop while her companions remained unbuckled. Upon the traffic lights' shift to green, she accelerated swiftly, veering onto a dimly lit secondary road leading to an industrial area. Initially unaware, her passengers gradually realized the gravity of the situation, feeling as if a malevolent force possessed the driver. Despite their shock, Mackenzie relentlessly pressed the gas pedal, hurtling the car toward a stark brick wall. In the early hours of Sunday morning, the industrial area lay deserted, save for a lone resident who heard the impact and rushed to investigate. Discovering the wreckage, she promptly called emergency services. Medics arrived swiftly, but despite their efforts, Mackenzie's passengers succumbed to their injuries on the scene. Trapped in the wreckage, Mackenzie remained unconscious, her legs ensnared in the twisted metal. Despite her injuries, her vital signs were stable, offering a glimmer of hope amid the tragedy. Rescued and transported to the hospital, Mackenzie's injuries were assessed, revealing fractures and internal damage. Blood tests confirmed the influence of alcohol and drugs, which may have ironically mitigated the shock from her injuries, preventing immediate demise. Initially, investigators speculated Mackenzie's impaired state led to the crash, presuming she was unaware of her actions. However, her unconscious state precluded interrogation, leaving the true nature of events shrouded in mystery. Following a complex surgical procedure, Mackenzie gradually regained consciousness. Overwhelmed by remorse and the realization of her actions, she tearfully confided in the attending doctor, admitting her deliberate act of speeding into the wall with the intent to kill her boyfriend, intending to perish alongside him. Mackenzie also attributed Dave's presence in the car to his persistence, branding him an unwitting casualty. However, the doctor dismissed Mackenzie's confession as a product of post-operative confusion, attributing it to anesthesia, pain medication, and emotional distress. When authorities later questioned Mackenzie, her testimony underwent a drastic shift. She claimed partial amnesia, citing alcohol and drug consumption, asserting she couldn't recall the events of that fateful night, including Dave's presence in the vehicle. Despite her assertions, evidence contradicted Mackenzie's account, challenging her narrative of events. The surveillance cameras meticulously traced the initial segment of the car's journey, revealing Mackenzie's adherence to traffic laws until she abruptly veered onto a road leading to an industrial zone. Additionally, it emerged that Mackenzie had traversed the entire route multiple times in the preceding days, with her car spotted by numerous witnesses. Upon her hospital discharge, Mackenzie swiftly endeavored to resume her former carefree lifestyle, exhibiting no remorse and displaying confidence in evading consequences. Returning to her active presence on social media, she socialized with friends and made future plans. In September, she attended a concert of her favorite band in a neighboring city despite her ongoing recovery. Not even the incomplete healing of her leg bones deterred her from appearing on stage in a wheelchair, adorned with vibrant makeup and taking selfies with friends. By October, fully embracing life once more, Mackenzie partook in Halloween celebrations, dressed in a pre-made costume. She relished every moment, forging new connections along the way. However, on November 4, 2022, she was apprehended, marking the commencement of her trial and subsequent sentencing. The investigation spanned just over 3 months, culminating in Mackenzie's legal proceedings. The gathering of essential evidence facilitated the prosecution's case against Mackenzie, who faced charges of premeditated aggravated double murder and possession and use of a controlled substance, discovered both in her pocket and bloodstream. Throughout the legal proceedings, Mackenzie altered her testimony multiple times, initially claiming memory lapses and later asserting a desire to perish alongside her lover. However, inconsistencies arose, notably her prior act of securing herself with a seatbelt. Found guilty on all charges, Mackenzie's status as a minor at the time of the crime, just 5 days shy of her 18th birthday, warranted consideration. While eligible for consecutive sentences of 15 years for each murder, served concurrently due to her youth, Mackenzie could seek parole in 15 years at the age of 33. Both sides expressed discontent with the court's ruling. The victims' families sought a harsher sentence, while Mackenzie's legal team deemed it excessive and filed an appeal. Nonetheless, the judge upheld the original sentence, doubting Mackenzie's remorse and emphasizing the gravity of her actions. As Mackenzie begins her incarceration, she faces introspection regarding her atrocious deed. Parents can be very intrusive, arrogant, and demanding. Sometimes, their demands bring benefits, but other times, they can be dangerous. Brett Ryan found himself in such a situation. He grew up in a prosperous, large Canadian family with his parents, Bill and Susan, and his 3 brothers. Managing a big family, especially with 4 boys, might seem exhausting, but Bill and Susan made it work. Bill, besides his prestigious job at the Toronto Star, had many hobbies, including sports, yoga, and psychology. Susan was incredibly hardworking, keeping their huge house in a prestigious Toronto area in perfect condition without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Neighbors often admired their blooming garden through the fence. Brett was not the family favorite, as Suzanne loved all her children equally. However, it might have seemed that Brett was scolded the least due to his obedience. He had an uncanny ability to navigate out of any situation, even when the evidence pointed to his involvement. This skill made him popular at school, with many wanting to be his friend or at least greet him. Like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always wanted to surpass them, so he started a business offering painting services for houses and fences. Initially, things went well and Susan was proud of him, holding him up as an example. However, Brett eventually dropped out of university to focus on his business, while his brothers, Christopher and Leland, graduated and secured jobs in their respective fields. Brett's confidence waned. Christopher worked for the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became a family artist and designer. They moved out, but Brett, to save money on rent, stayed with his parents and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. As the years passed, Brett became more desperate due to his mounting debts and inability to pay them off. By 2007, Brett Ryan had developed depression. At 26 years old, his debt had surpassed $60,000. Despite being considered intelligent, he struggled to use his mind productively and masked his struggles with a constant smile, volunteering, and helping others. No one could see the deep darkness within him. The breaking point came on October 28, 2007. Brett had no orders for house painting or any other work. Fall was a slow season, and winter promised even fewer opportunities. Desperate, Brett donned old clothes, a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a comically long scarf his mother had knitted. He wrapped the scarf around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed to a bank on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching a thick folder and limping slightly on his right foot, he waited his turn. When he approached the teller, he quietly informed her that he had a gun and demanded all the money from the cash register, threatening to shoot her if she didn't comply. With trembling hands, the teller handed him the cash. Brett quietly walked out to avoid attracting attention and then ran once he was outside. He counted the stolen money, a little over $1,000. Realizing he would need to rob about 60 banks to pay off his debts, he knew this was not a sustainable solution. For the first few days, Brett feared the police would catch him. He avoided home, telling his mother he had a job in a neighboring town and spent nights in his car. Periodically, he checked his house for police surveillance but saw none, believing he was safe. The first robbery was followed by a second, third, and fourth. Each time, Brett changed clothes, never reusing the old ones. He bought second-hand clothes or found them in the trash, burning them after each crime. He also purchased a fake beard from a costume shop. The bank employees always noticed his beard and testified that the attacker was a bearded man. Toronto newspapers began writing about the bearded robber. Finally, their patience paid off. Brett left his house, got into his car, and later exited near a bank, wearing another strange disguise. He entered the branch and lingered for a while, but when he exited, the police were waiting to finally handcuff him, announcing that the much-discussed bearded robber had been caught. Brett was under investigation for 7 months and charged with robbery with a firearm. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, he always robbed the banks empty-handed, not even carrying a kitchen knife. In total, he faced 19 counts and was sent to prison. From there, Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which yielded results. Only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. Brett didn't stop there. As soon as he had the opportunity to apply for parole, he took it. In his petition, Brett cited severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and a large amount of debt as reasons for his crimes. He emphasized that he committed the robberies without weapons, never intending to harm anyone. His remarks were considered, but he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist to secure early release. These sessions had a positive effect on Brett. While in prison, he didn't communicate with his family, but he made efforts to rebuild those relationships. His positive changes were noticed by the commissioners, and on November 24, 2010, Brett was released. However, freedom turned out to be more challenging than Brett anticipated. He was now branded as Brett the bank robber and Brett the ex-con. This reputation made it impossible for him to find employment, and even those who initially hired him for house painting services refused once they recognized him. The same neighbors who once praised Susan's garden now spread unpleasant rumors. The Ryan family hastily sold their house and moved to Scarborough, where Susan started a new garden. Brett found a low-paying job with a trading company and relied on his parents for financial support to rebuild his education. Brett continued seeing a psychologist who advised him not to break his connection with his family. This advice proved beneficial. Despite these efforts, Brett's financial situation remained dire. In September 2011, a fortunate event occurred. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an incredible woman with her own apartment overlooking the sea. She was athletic, maintaining a fit physique, and most importantly, she didn't care about Brett's past. They traveled together, including a trip to Australia, and Brett's parents were hopeful that Kristen would help him find stability. Brett's life seemed to improve, but then his father died, which was a severe shock. His depression returned, leading him to frequent his psychologist more often. He also had to spend a lot of time with his mother and help her financially, further straining his resources. Despite these challenges, Brett was deeply in love with Kristen and wanted to take their relationship to the next level. He had some savings and discussed with his mother his desire to propose to Kristen. Susan, understanding his intentions, gave him money to buy a ring. Although Kristen didn't need an expensive gift, Brett bought a gold ring with a huge diamond, wanting to make the proposal memorable. Kristen said yes, and they began planning their wedding. However, the expenses terrified Brett, making him realize the need for a stable job. He found an engineering job opening at a large technology company online, submitted his resume, and was accepted after a successful interview. Ecstatic, Brett shared the news with his fiancée and his mother, asking her for money once again to buy an expensive suit for work. His mother, supportive as always, did not refuse her son. After buying the suit, Brett received a call from the company informing him that they had to re-sign their offer because their security service had uncovered his criminal past. This news hit Brett like a bolt of lightning, plunging his mood into despair. He felt defeated and questioned why he should continue with the endless cycle of interviews and rejections when no one would hire a former criminal, even one who had tried to reform. Most importantly, he wondered why he should keep pursuing further education. Brett decided it was better to use the money his mother and older brothers had given him for his university education on his wedding to Kristen instead. He found himself back in the situation he had recently escaped from. He didn't tell his family that he had dropped out of university, nor did he reveal to this counselor or anyone that he had been turned down for the engineering job. Instead, he wore a shirt and tie and went back to painting houses, changing into his work clothes en route. He told his family he was working in an office and frequently posted photos online of supposed office events, all downloaded from the internet. He also pretended his phone was ringing with urgent work issues whenever he was around his loved ones, skillfully concealing the truth. By September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett planned their wedding. He even rented an expensive restaurant, costing $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled, believing Brett had finally turned his life around with a prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and a stunning bride. However, they were unaware that Brett's web of lies had become unsustainable. With the wedding only a month away, the event required significant investment. Brett repeatedly borrowed money from his mother, and when she could no longer assist, demanded she find a higher-paying job. He also planned a bachelor party in August, inviting all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, Brett decided to confide in his counselor. He admitted that he had been lying for a year about working as an engineer for a technology company. The psychologist was disheartened by Brett's relapse and advised him to come clean to his mother. Brett pondered this advice, struggling with the decision and putting off the confession. Eventually, Brett did confess to his mother. She was devastated, having spent so long bragging about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett come clean to Kristen, warning him that his brothers were already aware of the situation and were on her side. Brett, however, found it impossible to face Kristen with the truth. With the wedding less than a month away, he was acutely aware that it wouldn't happen as she knew. Despite knowing it would be better for Kristen to learn the truth sooner, Brett chose to remain silent, fearing the inevitable scandal if his mother told her. Every time Kristen's phone rang, Brett flinched, dreading that it might be his mother calling her. He was haunted by the thought of his mother spilling the truth, which would lead to a scandal. As his anxiety grew, Brett concocted a plan to silence his mother permanently. His conviction for robbery had prohibited him from using firearms, so he decided to use a crossbow, a relatively silent weapon. One of his late father's hobbies had been crossbow shooting, and Gret was proficient at it, although he knew his father would never have anticipated such a use of the skill. Gret purchased a crossbow and arrows from a sporting goods store and hid them behind construction debris in Susan's garage. He also devised an elaborate alibi. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer, which would activate the fan and move the spoon across his computer keyboard to post pre-written comments on YouTube. From the outside, it would appear as though Gret had spent the day at home, watching videos and commenting. On the morning of August 25th, Gret, dressed in disguising clothes that obscured his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras and took a train to his parents' home. His intention was to remove any obstacles to his and Kristen's future. Susan was taken aback by his unexpected visit. Although she had been feeling unwell, Gret persisted in persuading her not to reveal anything to Kristen. When Susan refused, Gret's anger boiled over. Seeing the madness in his eyes, Susan warned him that she had already called Christopher, who was on his way. Panicking, Gret rushed to the garage, retrieved the crossbow, but his rage and adrenaline made him incapable of aiming properly. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the crossbow, and to ensure she was dead, tightened a rope around her neck and covered her body with plastic bags. After hiding the crossbow in the bushes, Gret waited for his brother to arrive. When Christopher showed up and began calling for his mother or brother, Gret shot him in the neck from behind, killing him within minutes. Gret's next target was the youngest brother, Alexander, who, as it turned out, Susan had managed to call as well. Alexander was also shot in the neck, but the arrow either didn't penetrate deeply enough or missed vital arteries, so Alexander didn't die immediately. Instead, he began to scream and call for help. Meanwhile, Leland was asleep in his room on the second floor, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding in the garage and garden, or that it was his own brother behind the violence. The commotion woke Leland, and when he came downstairs, he found Gret trying to strangle Alexander. A violent struggle ensued between Leland and Gret. As Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Gret away, he ran to the neighbors to call the police. Left with no escape and realizing he had irrevocably ruined his life, Gret took out his phone and wrote a letter to Kristen, asking for her forgiveness. When the police arrived, they found a bloody Gret sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Gret himself requested to be handcuffed and taken to the station, where he confessed to the crimes. He also revealed the location of his mother's body hidden under plastic in the garage, though it was too late to save her. At the police station and later in court, Gret admitted that he had not intended to kill Susan. His original plan was to scare her, Christopher, and Alexander. However, he did plan to kill that day, and if the witnesses had not arrived, they would have been among the victims. Gret tried to justify his actions by citing his depressive state, but it did little to mitigate his sentence. Despite his full confession and cooperation with the investigation, the judge sentenced him to 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder, with the possibility of parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the horrific events, has chosen not to speak to reporters but is known throughout Toronto for his role in surviving the carnage. As the investigation continued, the media coverage of Gret Ryan's crimes made headlines across Toronto. The shocking nature of the murders, combined with Gret's previously respectable public image, captured the city's attention. Many were left grappling with the complexity of Gret's character, once a seemingly successful individual, now revealed as a murderer with a dark past. Gret's trial was a media spectacle. His defense attorney tried to emphasize his mental state, arguing that his severe depression had clouded his judgment and led him down a path of irreversible violence. Despite these arguments, the prosecution maintained that Gret's premeditation and attempts to cover his tracks demonstrated a deliberate intent to kill. The courtroom was filled with tension as the details of the murders were laid bare. Throughout the trial, Gret's remaining family was left to deal with the aftermath. Leland, having witnessed the horror and lost his brothers, became a figure of resilience and endurance. Despite his traumatic experiences, he chose to remain out of the media spotlight, focusing on his own healing process. His bravery and testimony played a crucial role in the conviction, but the psychological scars would take years to heal. Susan's funeral was attended by many, a somber reminder of the vibrant woman she once was. The community came together to support the Ryan family, who now faced not only their personal loss, but also the burden of their son's actions. In the years following the trial, Brett's life in prison became a series of legal battles and personal reflection. He underwent various psychological evaluations and participated in therapy sessions, trying to make sense of his actions and seek some form of redemption. His letters to Kristen and attempts to reconnect with his family from behind bars highlighted his ongoing struggle with guilt and regret. Kristen, devastated by the betrayal and the loss of her dreams for a future with Brett, found herself navigating her own path of healing. The relationship had ended abruptly, and she was left to rebuild her life in the wake of the emotional turmoil. As Brett approaches his first eligibility for parole in 2041, the question remains whether he has truly changed. His case continues to spark debate about the nature of redemption and a capacity for change within the justice system. The scars of his crimes are not just on the lives he directly affected, but also on the broader community that witnessed his downfall. The Ryan family story serves as a stark reminder of how hidden struggles can sometimes erupt into devastating violence. It underscores the importance of mental health awareness and a need for support systems to help those who are struggling before they reach a breaking point. In the quiet, picturesque town of Pine Hill, the gruesome murder of Jennifer Johnson sent shock waves through the community. What appeared to be a peaceful, close-knit suburban enclave was shattered by a crime of passion and betrayal that revealed the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic lives. The lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, intertwined in ways that would lead to obsession, deceit, and ultimately murder. Daniel Garner was a respected architect known for his charming demeanor and seemingly perfect marriage to Linda, a dedicated schoolteacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were the Garners' closest friends. The two couples shared more than just neighborhood barbecues and weekend getaways. They also engaged in a consensual wife-swapping arrangement that initially brought excitement and novelty to their lives. However, beneath the surface of this unconventional lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession, one that Linda, his wife, was painfully aware of. Jennifer, sensing the intensity of Daniel's feelings, decided to put an end to the arrangement, not realizing the deadly consequences her decision would provoke. Daniel and Linda Garner had been married for 10 years, and from the outside, their marriage appeared to be a model of stability and happiness. Daniel was a successful architect known for his innovative designs and charismatic personality. Linda, a third-grade teacher, was beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. They lived in a charming house on Maple Street, surrounded by a well-tended garden that Linda took great pride in. Mark and Jennifer Johnson moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with the Garners. Mark, a financial advisor, was outgoing and affable, always the life of the party. Jennifer, with her striking beauty and magnetic personality, was equally popular. The Johnsons brought a new dynamic to the neighborhood, and their friendship with the Garners blossomed over shared interests and mutual respect. The idea of wife-swapping was first brought up during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation turned to the topic of open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the concept was met with curiosity rather than shock. Over the next few weeks, the idea was discussed more seriously, with all parties agreeing to boundaries and rules to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. The first encounter was awkward but exciting. Daniel and Jennifer and Mark and Linda exchanged partners for the night. It was a thrilling yet nerve-wracking experience, but one that left them eager for more. What started as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, adding a spark to both marriages. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work well. Both couples appeared happier and more connected. They maintained their social activities, often hosting joint parties and going on vacations together. Their secret was carefully guarded, discussed only within the confines of their homes or during private gatherings. The novelty of the arrangement brought a sense of exhilaration, and for a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, particularly in Daniel's behavior. He started to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer, often finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his increasing preoccupation but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, too, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. Unbeknownst to the others, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was turning into something deeper and more troubling. He found himself thinking about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind and craving more time with her. What had started as a harmless adventure was slowly morphing into an obsession that would have devastating consequences for all involved. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was no longer just a thrill. It had evolved into an all-consuming obsession. He thought about her incessantly, his mind wandering to their encounters during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. He started to find ways to be near her, volunteering to help with tasks Mark usually handled or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda began to notice the change in her husband. At first, she attributed it to the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon it became clear that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. He became irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often veered towards Jennifer's likes and dislikes, her quirks and habits. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel. His reaction was defensive, dismissing her concerns as jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions grew when she found him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. Initially flattered by his attention, she soon found it uncomfortable. His touches became more possessive, his words more intimate than appropriate. She discussed her discomfort with Mark, who brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling isolated in her concerns. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples had planned the getaway to reconnect and enjoy some time away from their routine. However, the trip only served to highlight Daniel's fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting fresh, just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time, he was less dismissive but still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband but was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started to follow Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, and even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear. She confided in a close friend who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback, but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger. She realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. She told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she also felt a twisted loyalty to Daniel. She promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on and playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger. Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down. She reassured him that they would find a way to move past this, but inside she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, the true extent of Daniel's obsession and the depths of Linda's complicity would soon come to light, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and painful, and Jennifer could see the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The altercation attracted the attention of a neighbor who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind filled with a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries as Jennifer's life slipped away. Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home where Linda found him trembling and incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done and, in a moment of twisted loyalty, decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and self-preservation, Linda quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament. She knew they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, making sure to eliminate any trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then she drove to a secluded area outside of town where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, although visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for any updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested to Daniel that he should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death to align with the community's grief. and to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. Daniel's mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol, but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, that he needed to come clean. Linda, panicked, tried to calm him down and maintain their composure. She suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace. The isolation provided a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interaction, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior, and whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on. But the pressure was mounting and the facade was beginning to crumble. But his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered, the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered and overwhelmed, began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. However, in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement. But as Mitchell detailed the evidence in Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel, charged with first-degree murder, and Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both pled guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife. The tragedy had left an indelible mark on the community, a stark reminder of the destructive power of obsession and deceit.